The clack of Louboutin heels echoed off marble floors as Zola Wade strode through the glass doors of her company's headquarters. Her reflection followed her in every polished surface, angular, composed, untouchable, a living sculpture carved in ambition. At 39, Zola had become a name whispered with reverence and envy across the luxury beauty world. Wade Skincare was more than a brand, it was a movement, a reclamation of black beauty, rich in heritage and crafted from generational wisdom. Her products were in vogue, her interviews in Forbes. Her calendar was color-coded in half-hour increments. There was no room in it for hesitation, and certainly none for sentiment. "You're trending again," said Lonnie, her assistant, falling into step beside her. The younger woman held a tablet like a shield. "Someone posted your acceptance speech from the awards last night. You were controlled," Zola interrupted, glancing at her own reflection in the elevator panel. "As intended." Lonnie cleared her throat. "Also, the gala board finalized the tribute piece. They're commissioning a portrait for the Legacy Award wall." Zola's brow rose just slightly. "A painting?" "Yes, a portrait to be unveiled at the event. The artist is Isaiah Bell." "Sounds familiar." "He's known for realism," Lonnie offered. "Emotionally layered portraits. His subjects look seen." Zola's jaw tensed. "I already tried to push for something more symbolic," Lonnie added quickly. "But they insisted. He's selective, though. Apparently, he only paints people he connects with." The elevator doors opened to the executive floor. Zola stepped out, her stride never breaking. "I don't need connection," she said. "Just a portrait." But long after she entered the boardroom and began discussing seasonal packaging redesigns and quarterly metrics, Isaiah Bell's name tugged at the back of her mind. Seen. She'd built a life on not being. The morning light poured through the high windows of Isaiah Bell's studio, spilling across unfinished canvases, worn wood floors, and coffee-stained sketch pads. The scent of linseed oil and jasmine tea hung in the air, a mix of habit and intention. Isaiah moved through the space barefoot, steady and unhurried. He paused beside a nearly completed painting of an elderly man sitting on a Brooklyn stoop, eyes full of stories. The painting wasn't technically perfect. He'd left the brushstrokes raw, the lines loose, but it had heart. That was what mattered. That was always what mattered. His phone buzzed once on the counter. "Lonnie, Wade Skincare. Confirming your availability this week. Ms. Wade can sit for preliminary sketches starting Thursday. 3 sessions." Isaiah exhaled through his nose and deleted the message after reading. He remembered Zola Wade. He'd seen her face before. Sleek, impeccable. A woman who curated herself like a gallery. She was the kind of client he usually turned down. But something about her eyes in the magazine cover he'd glanced at weeks ago, distant, polished but heavy with something unsaid, stayed with him. He walked to his workbench and flipped through his sketchbook, past rough outlines of strangers he'd passed on the train, a woman cradling a toddler on the sea line, and a self-portrait he'd started months ago but couldn't finish. His hand hovered over a blank page. "She's going to hate this," he muttered to himself but smiled faintly. Isaiah didn't paint armor. He painted what armor tried to hide. He moved to the record player in the corner, dropped the needle onto a Sam Cooke album, and let the music fill the room. It was how he started every portrait. Not with photos, not with questions, but with rhythm, with space, with honesty. He had 3 sessions to see who Zola Wade really was. He hoped she showed up. The studio was humbling. Zola stood just inside the doorway, her heels silent on the wide wooden planks. The space wasn't cluttered, but it was undeniably lived in. Sunlight filtered through gauzy curtains, catching in floating dust. Paint-smeared rags were folded in a way that looked accidental and intentional all at once. There were no framed accolades on the walls, just color, texture, breath, and him. Isaiah Bell stood across the room, mixing something on his palette, a brush tucked behind one ear. He wore a soft black Henley rolled to his elbows, and a pair of paint-flecked jeans that had clearly earned their stories. His locks were pulled back, and when he glanced up, his eyes were warm, steady, not impressed, not intimidated. Just seeing. "Miss Wade," he greeted. "You're early." "I'm efficient." Zola crossed the room and extended a hand. "Let's get started." Isaiah took it, his grip firm but unhurried. "We will, once you sit." He gestured toward a worn leather chair angled in the best light. Zola eyed it. No backdrop, no flattering shadows, just a chair and a beam of morning sun. No makeup team, no lighting, she asked, arching a brow. I paint people, not campaigns. Zola didn't flinch, but her jaw ticked ever so slightly. And what exactly do you need from me? He tilted his head, studying her like she was a puzzle with 1,000 subtle pieces. Stillness. Honesty. A little time. Zola laughed, short and sharp. That's quite the list, Mr. Bell. I find it's shorter than the one people use to hide. Their eyes held for a beat longer than comfort allowed. With a sigh, Zola unclasped her blazer, folded it over a nearby stool, and sat. Her spine was a column of steel, her expression neutral, unreadable. Isaiah didn't speak again for a while. He began sketching, not even looking at the paper as much as he studied her. The silence wasn't awkward, it was intentional, like a challenge she hadn't expected. She tried not to shift under his gaze. Finally, he said, "You wear control like a tailored suit." "I am control," she replied evenly. He nodded once. "We'll see." Zola walked out of Isaiah Bell's studio with her jaw tight and her steps clipped. The sun had risen higher while she sat there, being quietly dismantled under the weight of a stranger's gaze. Not once had he asked about her accomplishments, her company, or the upcoming gala. Instead, he just watched, as if waiting for something to crack. Her driver opened the car door and she slid in without a word. Once seated, she smoothed her hands down her skirt, then reached for her phone. Dozens of unread emails blinked back at her, a comfort she didn't admit out loud. Tasks, numbers, decisions, all clear, measurable, controllable. Unlike Isaiah. She opened a message from Lonnie. Subject: session recap, next appointment? Zola hesitated. The truth was, she hadn't expected the silence. She hadn't expected to feel observed, not as a CEO, but as a woman. She'd expected him to sketch her jawline, ask for headshots, maybe position her in front of something powerful, something branded. But instead, he asked for honesty, then sat still and made her sit with herself. No mirrors, no direction, just quiet scrutiny, and she wasn't sure what he saw. Or worse, what he didn't. She hovered her finger over the cancel button. Then she remembered the moment he'd looked at her. Not her title, not her skin routine, not her posture, but her, and tilted his head like a musician listening for a note just under the surface. He hadn't flinched when she crossed her legs or raised an eyebrow. He didn't defer or perform. He just watched. It unnerved her, but it also intrigued her. With a sigh, Zola replied, "Confirm the second session, same time." Then, as an afterthought, she added, "Ask if he wants me to bring anything different." Because for once, she wasn't entirely sure what part of herself he was painting, and that was more dangerous than she liked to admit. Isaiah stared at the unfinished sketch still taped to his easel. It wasn't bad, not technically. Her posture was exact, her angles defined, but that wasn't the part that held him. It was her silence, the kind that pressed down on a room, not out of fear or nervousness, but discipline. Control. Zola Wade hadn't said much, but she didn't have to. Her stillness had done all the talking. He poured a splash of tea into his chipped ceramic mug and walked it over to the easel, sipping as he studied the lines he'd drawn. Her eyes were focused straight ahead in the sketch, but he'd seen the flicker, the moment they dropped when she thought he wasn't looking. That was the real her. The part she tucked away beneath curated poise. He could still feel the echo of her energy in the studio, like tension strung on a wire. She hadn't come to be seen, she came to be portrayed. There was a difference. But he wasn't interested in painting her resume. He was interested in the pause she took before speaking. The protective armor in her tone. The way her fingers curled subtly inward when she folded her hands. Small things. True things. Isaiah set the tea down and reached for charcoal again. Not to sketch, just to drag it between his fingers. Habit, thought, focus. He wasn't sure if she'd come back. Many didn't. The ones who expected flattery, who wanted to be idealized, tended to cancel after the first sitting. They didn't like the way he made them feel, stripped of pretense. Human. But Zola? No, she hadn't flinched. She'd fought it, quietly, but she'd stayed. That said more than anything. His phone buzzed across the table. Lanny, confirmed. Same time Thursday. She asked if you want her to bring anything different. Isaiah smiled to himself. That was a shift. He tapped out a reply. No, just herself. Then paused and added, whichever version she's ready to bring. He turned back to the canvas and peeled the tape away, letting the sketch rest. It wasn't finished, not even close. But the real portrait hadn't begun yet anyway. It would start when she stopped posing and started unraveling. And for that, he'd wait. The second session began the same way. No small talk, no frills. Zola arrived in a deep navy pantsuit, her heels soft against the studio floorboards, her expression unreadable. She sat in the same worn leather chair without prompting, spine straight, arms rested on the chair's edges like a queen on a minimalist throne. Isaiah didn't rush. He simply adjusted the canvas, chose a graphite pencil over charcoal this time, and positioned himself at a quiet distance. Jazz played low in the background, horns drifting like smoke, while the late afternoon sun stretched gold across the floor. He watched her through the hush, and then, without looking up from his page, he asked, "Who believed in you first?" Zola's lips parted, a protest rising, but she didn't release it. Instead, she sat still, her breath barely audible over the music. Isaiah waited. Finally, her voice, softer than he'd ever heard it, emerged. "My grandmother, Zola Wade." The way she said the name, it didn't belong to a brand or a legacy. It belonged to a memory. She was the one who made the creams in her kitchen, shea butter and moringa and neem oil. She had this soft hum when she stirred the pot, like it was a song only the ingredients knew. Zola blinked once. She didn't call it a business. She called it love work. Isaiah didn't interrupt. His pencil moved gently across the page. "She used to rub the oils into my hands after I played outside. Said our skin wasn't just skin, it was memory. It carried where we came from, who we were." Zola exhaled, her voice nearly a whisper now. "She believed I could take it further than her, even I didn't want to." There it was. A thread of something raw, grief maybe, reverence, maybe both. Isaiah didn't speak. He didn't have to. Instead, he captured the curve of her shoulder as it relaxed a fraction, the angle of her jaw not clenched but thoughtful, and her mouth still firm but no longer guarded. He drew the softness in her voice. The woman behind the power, and Zola sat quietly, for once, not performing. When the session ended, she didn't rush to stand. She looked at him. "Do you ask everyone that question?" Isaiah offered a slow smile. "Only the ones who think no one ever really did." She didn't respond, but her eyes lingered on him just a second longer than necessary before she gathered her bag and left. And when the door closed behind her, Isaiah turned back to the sketch. It was the first time he'd drawn her without armor, and it was beautiful. Zola stood in the middle of her penthouse kitchen, still in her suit, hands resting on the cool marble island. The city sprawled below, endless windows reflecting the evening sky, but she didn't move to admire it. She was still thinking about him. Isaiah Bell's voice echoed in her mind, quiet but persistent. "Who believed in you first?" She hadn't planned to answer, and yet the words had slipped out, soft and certain like breath in winter. Her grandmother, Zola Wade. The scent of boiling shea butter and orange peel came back to her so vividly, it almost stopped her breath. Zola stepped away from the kitchen and walked barefoot into the living room, unzipping her blazer, tossing it over the back of a sleek chair. She sat down, suddenly tired, not just physically, but in her bones. The last time someone asked her about her grandmother was at a press event 5 years ago, and even then, the question was a setup. What inspired your brand's origin story? Origin story. Like she was a myth, a marketing pitch. But Isaiah hadn't asked that. He didn't even write the name down. Zola leaned forward and opened the bottom drawer of her media console. She reached past old awards and rolled blueprints and pulled out a small wooden box, its hinges creaky, its smell faintly of rosewater and cedar. Inside, wrapped in yellowing tissue paper, was a tin of her grandmother's original balm. The handwritten label had long since faded. She opened it. The scent was still there. Clove, lavender, cocoa. Her chest tightened. She used to sit on the floor beside her grandmother's chair, her little legs crisscrossed, palms up, waiting for Lila's warm hands to smooth the balm across her skin. Each motion was a lullaby. "You carry more than skin," her grandmother used to say. Zola hadn't cried in years. Not for lack of reasons, but for lack of permission. She hadn't known how to be vulnerable and powerful in the same breath. Until today. She closed the tin and set it gently on the coffee table. Isaiah hadn't asked for her resume. He'd asked for her memory. And she hadn't realized how much she missed being seen without needing to impress. That terrified her. And somewhere deep down, it moved her too. Zola didn't sleep much that night. She told herself it was the quarterly review coming up, or the press preview of the new serum launch, or the inbox that refilled itself every 3 minutes. But she knew better. It was the question, the softness it pulled from her, and Isaiah's steady eyes that hadn't tried to fix her, just see her. By morning, she'd made a decision. "Push my session with the artist," she said crisply as she walked into the office, coat still on, tablet already in hand. Lanny blinked. "Push it to when?" Undecided. She didn't stop moving. Heading straight to her corner office, all glass and clean lines. The city below buzzed with purpose. Predictable, just how she liked it. Lonnie followed her in, carefully closing the door behind her. "Zola, is something wrong?" Zola paused, setting her bag down. She didn't turn around right away. "I'm not sure I want to finish the painting." There was a beat of silence. Lonnie stepped forward slowly. "Why? Did something happen? Did he say something inappropriate?" "No." Zola turned now, her expression unreadable. "He was professional, quiet, focused. That's the problem." Lonnie raised a brow. "You lost me." Zola walked to the window, arms folded. "He asked about my grandmother." "Oh," Lonnie's voice softened. "That's not exactly scandalous. He didn't ask for her recipe. He asked who believed in me first." Zola's jaw tightened, and I told him. Without thinking, just said it. Lonnie was quiet, but there was something behind her eyes now. "So you're quitting because he saw something real?" Zola bristled. "I didn't say I was quitting. I said I'm reconsidering whether he's the right person for this." "You mean the person who's not afraid of you?" Zola shot her a sharp look. Lanny held her ground. "I've worked for you 7 years, Z. You don't talk about your grandmother, ever. And now you're telling me you did, to a stranger, and that's a reason to run?" Zola looked away. Lonnie took a step closer. "Maybe that's why he's exactly the person to do it." Zola didn't respond. She just stared out the window. Brooklyn spread beneath her like a question she didn't know how to answer. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't know what to do next. Isaiah didn't need a calendar alert to know she wasn't coming. He'd prepared the studio anyway, opened the windows for light, put on soft guitar instrumentals instead of jazz, cleared the clutter from the bench beside the easel, even brewed tea. But when the hour came and went, and no polished heels echoed down his hallway, he wasn't surprised. Disappointed? Maybe, but not surprised. Some people flinched when their reflection was too honest. He stood in front of the easel, arms crossed. The last sketch he'd done of her, shoulders less rigid, mouth just barely curved, eyes remembering, was still clipped to the board. The one where she talked about her grandmother. He didn't need to touch it. It was already saying what it needed to. Instead, he turned to a new page in his sketchbook. There was a moment during their second session, brief, maybe 2 seconds, when Zola had almost smiled. He remembered it clearly. She'd said something wry about the branding world eating itself alive, and for a heartbeat, something unguarded broke through her armor. A glimpse of her before she'd been shaped by boardrooms and burdened by legacy. He began to sketch it from memory, her head tilted slightly back, eyes narrowed in amused disbelief, lips parted mid-laugh. There was a joy in it, but one that didn't come easy, the kind you fight for, the kind you protect. He worked slowly, deliberately. This wasn't for the gala, this was for him, for the part of her no one had asked to see. He didn't know if she'd come back. Maybe she'd cancel the portrait altogether. Maybe she'd choose another artist, someone who'd paint her like a monument instead of a woman. But he couldn't stop his hand. The image was already alive in his mind, and now, on the page, when he finished, he stared at it for a long time. It wasn't perfect, but it was true. And if she ever came back, he'd show it to her, not as leverage, not as proof, just as a reminder that somewhere inside all her control was someone who still remembered how to laugh. It was almost dusk when Zola arrived at the studio. No appointment, no warning. She told herself it was curiosity, or professionalism, or closure. But when she stood at the door, palm flat against the frame, she knew it was something more dangerous. Wanting to be understood. She knocked once, no answer. The hallway was quiet. She tried the handle, it gave way. "Isaiah," she called out, stepping cautiously inside. Silence. The light in the studio was soft, honey gold melting into shadows. The windows were open. A paintbrush rested in a mug of water. A sweater was slung over the back of a stool, suggesting he'd stepped out briefly. She didn't mean to snoop. She just turned her head and saw it. A sketch, taped to a board near the open easel. Raw graphite strokes, unfinished in places, but unmistakable, her. But not the Zola Wade the public knew. Not the polished CEO. Not the woman with unshakable posture and clipped answers. This woman was laughing. Head tilted back slightly, mouth open in a genuine, unscripted smile. Not a smirk, not performative amusement. A laugh, real, lit from within. Zola's breath caught. She stepped closer, her heels now silent against the floor. Her fingers hovered near the edge of the paper, but didn't touch. She couldn't look away. She didn't remember laughing like that. Not during their session. Not in years. And yet Isaiah had seen it. More than that, he'd drawn it. Held it in his hands and gave it shape without her even knowing it existed. A flicker of embarrassment rose in her chest. Then fear. But beneath both was something deeper. Warmer. Gratitude. She stood there for a long moment, surrounded by silence and soft evening air, staring at a version of herself she'd long since buried. When Isaiah returned, paper bag in one hand, keys in the other, he stopped short in the doorway. Zola didn't turn around right away. "I wasn't going to come back," she said quietly. Isaiah didn't move. "I figured." She finally turned to face him. "But you drew me anyway." "I did." She looked down at the sketch again, then back at him. "You saw something I didn't mean to give you." "I didn't take it," he said gently. "You offered it, even if you didn't mean to." Zola didn't reply. Instead, she walked past him slowly toward the door. At the threshold, she paused. "I don't know what this is," she said, "but it's more than I asked for." Isaiah's voice was calm but certain. "Maybe it's exactly what you need." And this time she didn't argue. Zola returned to the studio the next morning, not out of obligation but something closer to defiance. Of what, she wasn't entirely sure. Maybe herself. Maybe the part of her that still flinched at being seen without control. Isaiah was already there, adjusting the light, the easel turned away from her this time. "You left the door open yesterday," she said as she stepped inside. He didn't look at her right away. "Didn't think you'd come back." "Neither did I." She set her bag down, her posture crisp, her tone sharper than she meant. "About the sketch." Now he looked at her. Her gaze didn't waver. "You made me look unprofessional." His expression didn't shift, calm, anchored. "No, I made you look human." Zola's jaw tightened, but she didn't fire back. "Not right away. I don't need the world seeing that version of me." Isaiah's eyes softened, but his voice stayed firm. "Maybe that's the version they need most." Silence filled the studio like steam, tense, rising. Then, finally, she sat. No blazer, no heels, just Zola. She crossed one leg over the other, looked down at her hands, and said quietly, "You know, I wasn't supposed to run this company." Isaiah paused, pencil in hand. "My grandmother built it from nothing. Passed it to my mother, who treated it like a burden. And when I took over, I promised I'd make it more than a family formula passed through kitchens." Her eyes flicked up, meeting his. "I've had to fight for every investor, every shelf space, every headline that didn't reduce me to a skin tone and a slogan." Isaiah's pencil moved again, this time slower, respectful. "I've spent my whole life proving I belong in rooms that were never built for me," she said. "You don't get to be soft when you're trying to make people see you as excellent." "I know something about that," Isaiah murmured. Zola arched a brow. "Do you?" He hesitated, then set the pencil down. "My ex-wife said I was too much and not enough all at once," he said. "Too emotional, too quiet, not hungry enough, not man enough. I spent years in a marriage where I was invisible, and then got punished for needing to be seen." Zola blinked, caught off guard by the honesty. Isaiah shrugged lightly. "It's hard to paint people who don't let themselves be real, but it's even harder to love someone who won't be real with you." The air in the studio shifted, less sharp, more aware. They weren't posing anymore. They were talking. For the rest of the session, there were fewer pauses, more shared silences that felt like trust, not tension. She told him about her first failed product launch. He told her about the gallery he left behind after the divorce. And when she laughed, truly this time, Isaiah didn't sketch it. He just looked at her and smiled. It started with tea. Not a grand gesture, no big declarations, just a simple question as Zola slipped her coat on after another long session. "Would you stay a little longer?" Isaiah asked, almost casually. "I made jasmine mint." Zola paused, coat half on. He wasn't sketching. There was no canvas between them. Just two mugs on a nearby table and music playing low, something older than both of them crackling softly through the speaker. She hesitated for only a second before unhooking the coat from her arm. 10 minutes, she said. He smiled. 15. They sat in mismatched chairs, knees not quite touching, the quiet not heavy anymore, just comfortable. Zola held the warm mug between her palms, letting the steam rise into her face. "Do you always serve tea to your clients?" she asked. "Only the ones who confuse me." She glanced at him sideways. "I confuse you?" Isaiah leaned back in his chair, mug resting on his knee. "You act like you want to be invisible and unforgettable at the same time." Zola didn't respond at first. Then, "I was taught to be exceptional, not accessible." "That's exhausting." She nodded slowly. "It is." They fell into silence again, but this time it felt like exhale. He told her about his favorite cafe near Fort Greene Park, the one with the buttery shortbread and music nights on Sundays. She told him about sneaking into her grandmother's garden after church to smell lemongrass before it was harvested. Small things, soft things, things that didn't require armor. And then somehow, they were walking, Isaiah's idea. A brain stretch, he called it. The streets outside were cool and quiet, the city humming low. They didn't touch, didn't rush, just wandered through Brooklyn like two people who weren't in a hurry to go back to being who the world expected them to be. At a corner fruit stand, Zola picked up a plum, examined it, then set it down. "I used to eat these until my fingers were stained," she said. "Now I'd probably need a napkin and a PR explanation." Isaiah chuckled. "You should try being sticky-fingered and happy again." She looked at him. "You're dangerous." "No," he said, "just honest." When he walked her to her car, he didn't ask for anything. No next date, no hug, just said, "You're easier to know than you think." And Zola, for once, didn't correct him. She got in, closed the door, and sat there for a moment after the driver pulled away, fingers still warm from the tea and something else she couldn't quite name. But she'd felt it. And it was soft. And she wanted more. The brush dipped into muted gold, then soft brown. Isaiah's hand moved slowly, methodically, shaping the outline of her shoulder. Not in hard edges, but suggestion, curved strength, poised gravity. She was sitting in silence, and still, she felt louder than anyone he'd ever painted. This was the real beginning. The official portrait. He didn't need to tell her that. She knew by the way the easel was adjusted, by the solemnity in his motions, by the way he no longer watched her like a stranger trying to figure her out, but like someone who had seen enough to know when to go gently. Zola sat still, but this time it wasn't a performance. It was presence. "Close your eyes," Isaiah said quietly. She obeyed. "Now open them slowly." She did, and he began to paint. Across town, Lonnie stepped into Zola's office holding a stack of proofs and post-campaign figures. The usual. She expected to find Zola pacing or responding to emails with rapid precision. Instead, Zola was seated, elbow on her desk, chin resting lightly in her hand, staring at her laptop. Her brows were faintly pulled together, lips slightly parted. Not in frustration, but curiosity? Lonnie edged closer. Zola was scrolling through Isaiah Bell's online gallery. Portraits, mostly, some famous, some anonymous, all of them vivid, alive, human. There was something reverent in the way Zola's eyes lingered on one image, a mother nursing a baby, hair undone, half smile visible in her tired face. Zola didn't notice Lonnie watching at first. When she did, she shut the laptop quickly, not guiltily, just instinctively. Lonnie arched a brow, arms crossed. That was definitely not a sales forecast. Zola leaned back in her chair, composed again, almost. "I was just reviewing his work." Zola didn't bite, just raised a single brow, but Lonnie wasn't done. "You're different." Zola blinked. "Excuse me?" "Not in a bad way. You're just..." She waved a hand, softer, like he took a breath for the first time in 5 years and decided to actually exhale. Zola didn't respond. Not directly. Instead, she turned her gaze toward the large window, where a rare break in the clouds let sunlight dance across the floor. "I think he's painting something I didn't know I had," she said quietly. Lonnie's voice was softer now. "And you're letting him?" Zola's lips curved, barely. A hint of surrender. "Yes," she said. "I think I am." It was supposed to be another studio session. That's what Zola told herself when she showed up in her oversized cream sweater and soft jeans. No makeup, no earrings, just her. She told herself it was about the portrait, about staying on schedule, about finishing the commission with dignity. But when she arrived and Isaiah opened the door, she knew this wasn't just about the painting anymore. "Long day?" he asked gently. "Long year," she murmured, stepping inside. He didn't press, didn't ask what happened. He just handed her a mug of tea already steeped, warm between her hands like a small offering of peace. She sipped and settled into the worn love seat by the window. Her usual seat now, unofficially hers. Isaiah went back to the canvas, but didn't paint. Instead, they talked. About nothing and everything. About how her grandmother used to make hibiscus tea with too much sugar. About the gallery he once dreamed of opening before rent and divorce made it impossible. About the quiet ache of loneliness you can still feel, even in a room full of people calling you a success. At one point, a storm began outside. Nothing heavy, just wind and soft rain tapping the windows. It filled the silence between their words. Zola leaned her head back against the couch and closed her eyes. "I don't know how to do this," she said softly. Isaiah looked up from where he sat, sketchbook balanced on one knee. "Do what?" "This, being seen, not being in control. I'm good at power. I don't know what to do with peace." Isaiah stood, walked slowly over, and sat on the opposite end of the love seat. He didn't touch her, didn't offer advice, just sat there, present. "I don't want anything from you," he said after a moment. "Not your image, not your polish, just you. However you are." Zola turned her head to look at him. Their faces were close now, closer than they'd ever been. The air between them shifted, warmed. She could have kissed him. She thought about it, how easy it would be to reach forward, how natural it felt. But instead, she whispered, "Why do you make this feel so safe?" Isaiah smiled faintly. "Because it is." The moment lingered, then she leaned her head gently against his shoulder, and he let her stay there. No expectations, no portrait, just two people sitting still while the world outside kept rushing. Zola hadn't expected to feel nervous. She told herself it was just another session, that the closeness between them, the tea, the quiet laughter, the shoulder where she'd rested her head, was just a moment, a pause, a small reprieve from the chaos of her life. But when Isaiah pulled the drop cloth off the canvas, her breath caught. It wasn't finished. The strokes were still in progress, the shadows unblended, but her face, she wasn't looking out at the world like she did in headshots or press covers. She was looking down, her hands folded loosely in her lap, the corners of her mouth slightly curved. Thoughtful. Still. Soft in a way she didn't recognize, but somehow was her. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't dramatic. It was true. Her throat tightened. "I didn't realize I sat like that," she said quietly. "You didn't," Isaiah replied, standing a few feet away. "But you felt like that." Zola stepped closer, examining the folds in her sweater, the way he'd shaded her bare cheek. No makeup, no filter. "I'm not sure people are ready to see this version of me," she whispered. Isaiah's voice was steady. "Maybe they don't need to be. Maybe you do." She looked at him, something unspoken swirling behind her eyes. Gratitude, maybe, or fear, or both. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and froze. Gala Council, finalized portrait unveiling scheduled, media invited. Her chest tightened as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. "What is it?" Isaiah asked, reading the shift in her posture. She didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed her coat. Later that day, the door to Isaiah's studio slammed open. Zola's heels hit the floor with hard, fast steps. She didn't wait to be invited in. "Why didn't you tell me?" she snapped. Isaiah, startled mid-stroke, turned from the canvas. "Tell you what? That the painting would be unveiled publicly at the gala." He straightened. "I assumed you knew. The council." "You assumed?" Her voice was sharp now, frantic. "You don't get to assume when you're painting me, Isaiah. Not like that. Not when it looks like that." He set his brush down slowly. "What does it look like to you?" exposed. Raw, like something I didn't consent to reveal. Isaiah took a step forward, calm but unyielding. I didn't paint you to expose you, Zola. I painted you with love, with respect. You painted something I didn't approve. You didn't need to, he said, his voice low but firm, because for once you weren't performing. Zola turned away, trying to regain her composure, but it shattered in her hands like glass. I can't have that shown to the world, she whispered. They'll see everything I've spent my life protecting. Isaiah didn't move. Maybe that's the problem. She stared at him, stunned, hurt. I trusted you, she said. And I honored you, he replied. That portrait isn't weakness, it's resilience. You carry so much weight with so much grace. Why is that the part you're so afraid for them to see? Zola's lips parted, but nothing came out. She blinked, once, twice. Then quietly, she walked out the door. This time she didn't look back. The silence in Zola's apartment was loud. No meetings, no emails, no scheduled anything. Just her reflection staring back at her from the floor-length mirror in the corner of her bedroom. She still wore the same tailored slacks from earlier, but the blouse was half unbuttoned now, her feet bare. Her hair, usually wound in neat coils or styled into a structured crown, had loosened at the sides. She didn't look like the woman on the magazine covers. She looked real. And that terrified her. Zola moved slowly to her closet, reaching up to pull a weathered box from the top shelf. Inside were old photo albums, thick, heavy, unlabeled. No press shots, no awards, just life. She sank to the floor and opened the one with the cracked green binding. Her grandmother's smile met her immediately. Soft, strong, eyes bright as heat. In every photo, Zola Wade stood centered, but never boastful. Always holding someone, a child, a mixing bowl, a plant plucked from her backyard. Always touching something she loved. Zola flipped the pages slowly. One photo stopped her cold. She was maybe 9. Knees scabbed, pigtails messy, sitting in Lila's lap with cocoa bombs smeared all over her arms. Her grandmother was laughing, head back, mouth open wide. Zola was laughing too, mid-wiggle, mid-squirm. Completely unguarded. Her fingers traced the edge of the photo, and her chest began to ache. That's the girl Isaiah painted. Not the woman who won market shares or sat at the head of boardrooms. Not the protector of the brand or the voice behind the interviews. Just Zola. Human, loved, enough. Her grandmother had always told her, you don't have to polish to shine. But somewhere along the way, Zola had started mistaking shine for armor. And Isaiah, in his quiet way, had peeled it back, gently, lovingly, and shown her what she couldn't bear to admit, that there was power in being seen, even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She simply sat, barefoot on the floor, surrounded by laughter frozen in time, and let herself feel the weight of legacy, not as pressure, but as love. And in that stillness, she knew she had to go to the gala, not to prove anything, but to be. The morning of the gala, Zola stood in her walk-in closet surrounded by power suits and designer gowns, none of which felt right. Every outfit screamed control. And for the first time, that wasn't what she wanted. Lonnie arrived as requested, laptop in hand and brow furrowed with her usual schedule-snapping energy, only to find Zola sitting on the edge of her bed in a robe, eyes distant. I don't know if I can do this, Zola said softly. Lonnie blinked. The gala? You've been doing events like this since forever. Zola shook her head. Not like this. They're going to see the portrait, Lonnie. Really see me, not the campaign version, not the CEO. Her voice faltered. The woman I don't let anyone look at for too long. Lonnie crossed the room, slowly set her laptop down and sat beside her. Z, you are the strongest black woman I know. Not because you're flawless, but because you stand in rooms where you were never supposed to exist, and you make them yours. Zola didn't speak. Lonnie nudged her gently. You think your grandmother built all this just so you could hide? Zola looked at her, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. Wear the blue one, Lonnie said, already rising. Hair back, minimal jewelry, walk in like the woman you actually are. Zola nodded, slowly. Okay. That evening at the gala, flashbulbs sparked outside the venue as Zola stepped onto the carpet, the deep navy silk of her gown whispering with every step. Her hair was pulled back in a soft knot. No dramatic makeup, no bold lip, just Zola. Inside, chandeliers shimmered over a crowd dressed in diamonds and influence. The energy was electric, but her pulse was calm. because she had already decided she would not flinch. When the MC took the stage and called her name, Zola rose from her seat. Applause rang out, warm, insistent, respectful. Then came the unveiling. 2 staff members gently removed the covering. Gasps rose, then silence, then awe. There she was, not the CEO, not the icon, but the woman behind it all. Seated, still, powerful in her vulnerability. A softness in her eyes that spoke of fight and faith, the fullness of her heritage living in the color of her skin, the bend of her shoulders, the tenderness in her gaze. And the people loved it. One woman clutched her chest. A man whispered to his wife, "That's the most honest thing I've ever seen in this place." Phones were raised, eyes welled with tears. Not because it was pretty, because it was real. Zola stood beside the portrait, heart pounding, and smiled. Not because she had to, because she could. And in the distance, she saw Isaiah, standing near the gallery doors, hands in his pockets, watching her quietly. He didn't move. He didn't need to. Because in that moment, she knew exactly who he was, and who she was finally ready to be. The applause faded, the speeches wrapped, the champagne flowed, and the crowd moved on to the next moment. But Zola wasn't done. She scanned the room from the far edge of the gallery, eyes searching beyond sequins and flashbulbs, until they landed on him. Isaiah stood near a tall window, half in shadow, sipping quietly from a glass of something amber. He hadn't approached her, hadn't tried to claim credit or bask in the admiration that bloomed around the portrait like wildflowers. He just watched her, like he always did. Not with awe, but with knowing. Zola moved toward him, her gown whispering across the floor. When he looked up and saw her coming, he didn't smile. He waited. When she stopped in front of him, her voice was low. "Thank you." Isaiah tilted his head. "You sure?" She nodded, breathing in slow. "I came here tonight ready to hate that painting." "I know, but I didn't. I couldn't." It felt like someone finally said what I've been trying to scream without making a sound. Isaiah said nothing, but let her speak. "I'm sorry," she continued, softer now, "for how I came at you, for accusing you, for trying to control something I was afraid of." He met her gaze fully now, and she felt it, the weight of his attention. Gentle, unrelenting. "I've spent my whole life protecting myself from being seen," she said. "Being a black woman in beauty, you don't get to be soft. You don't get to have off days. You're either extraordinary or forgotten. And if you show too much doubt, too much emotion, too much you, they'll tell you you're unprofessional, difficult, angry." She took a breath. Her voice wavered but didn't break. "Sometimes I forget I'm allowed to be all of me." Isaiah stepped forward just slightly, close enough for his voice to drop to something private. "You didn't forget. You just had to be reminded." Zola looked up at him, the sharpness gone from her face. "And you saw me, before I was ready. That scared the hell out of me." Isaiah reached up, gently brushing a lock behind her ear. His fingers lingered at her cheekbone, not claiming, connecting. "I didn't fall for your brand," he said quietly. "I fell for the woman who carries it on her back every day and still manages to smile with her eyes, even when no one sees." Zola blinked, lips parting slightly. "I painted you with love, Zola," Isaiah continued. "Not to expose you, to honor you." Her eyes shone now, but the tears didn't fall. Instead, she smiled. "Then maybe it's time I start honoring me too." Isaiah leaned in, slow, certain, and pressed his forehead to hers. No kiss. Just the stillness of 2 people who had stripped everything else away. And in that quiet, something unspoken passed between them. Not just attraction, but recognition. The morning after the gala, Brooklyn was quiet. A warm breeze drifted through the streets, and the city for once didn't demand anything of Zola Wade. She walked without her usual urgency. No phone in hand, no assistant trailing behind, no curated outfit. Just jeans, a loose white blouse, sandals, and a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The front door of Isaiah's gallery was propped open, with a stone painted by a child's hand, bright swirls of yellow and blue. The bell above the door jingled as she stepped inside. He was there, of course, bent over a canvas, music low, light pouring through the high windows. He didn't look up right away. But when he did, he paused, not startled, just aware. "Didn't expect to see you so soon," he said, setting down his brush. Zola stepped inside, the door closing behind her with a soft click. I didn't come for a session, she said. No? She shook her head, eyes meeting his. I came to say thank you. Isaiah took a breath. For what? For showing me what I couldn't see in myself, she said simply. For painting the version of me I didn't think was worthy of being seen. She walked closer, slow but steady, the way someone approaches a familiar place they've finally decided to call home. I looked at that portrait last night, she continued, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to perform for it. Isaiah didn't speak, he just watched her, the same way he had in that first session when she wore armor. But this time, she wasn't wearing any. Zola stepped in front of him now, inches away, her voice dropped. I don't want to hide anymore. And then, without hesitation, she leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't tentative, it wasn't rehearsed. It was soft and certain and real. His hands came to her waist, gentle, grounding. She felt him exhale into the moment, like he'd been holding it in since the first time she sat in his chair. When they finally pulled apart, their foreheads still nearly touching, Isaiah whispered, "That's the first time you didn't hesitate." Zola smiled. "That's the first time I didn't need to." And somewhere in the corner of the room, the unfinished sketch of her laughing sat quietly, complete now, not in form, but in truth. 3 months later, Zola Wade slipped into Isaiah's studio through the side door. No driver, no entourage, just the soft rhythm of her sandals and the hush of early morning light. They didn't make public statements. There were no social media soft launches or gala red carpet reveals. But in the corners of Brooklyn, in tea shops and bookstores, in the studio where portraits lived and breathed, they were together, building something tender, something unshaped by outside eyes. Isaiah looked up from his canvas and smiled the way he always did now, like seeing her was the calm he'd been waiting for all day. "You're early," he said. She kissed his cheek and took her usual seat near the window. "Couldn't sleep. My mind won't stop." "About the rebrand?" Zola nodded. On the small coffee table beside her sat a mock-up folder labeled Lila, Ritual Skincare, soft font, rich tones, bold elegance. Her grandmother's name, front and center. "No more just being Wade," she said. "I want the world to know where it really came from." Isaiah leaned his elbow on the table, chin in hand. "It's the most honest thing you've ever done." "I'm terrified," she admitted, but this time she smiled after. "That's how you know it's right." They sat like that for a while, quietly sketching dreams on paper, sipping tea, letting the day unfold without urgency. Outside, the city moved fast. But in here, they took their time, and when Zola glanced around at the portraits on the walls, the one of her laughing tucked behind a potted fig tree, the unfinished canvas Isaiah kept revisiting when he missed her, she didn't flinch at the sight of herself anymore. She saw a woman still becoming. And finally, she was proud of the view. The launch event for Lila Ritual Skincare was nothing short of radiant. Held in a lush rooftop garden in downtown Brooklyn, the air shimmered with lavender and lemongrass, scents pulled straight from Lila Wade's original formula book. The space was warm, not pretentious, beautiful, but real. Just like the brand. Zola stood in front of a backdrop of wild blooms and ancestral portraits, all women, all black, all powerful in their softness. She wore a flowing white jumpsuit, her locks swept into a regal braid crown, no statement necklace, no stiff lines, just presence. When the host took the mic and introduced her as the visionary behind the rebrand, the crowd erupted in applause. But Zola didn't rush the podium. She reached for Isaiah's hand first. And this time, she didn't let go. The crowd shifted. Murmurs rose, a few cameras clicked, but Zola only smiled, real, radiant, unbothered. "This brand," she began, her voice rich and steady, "was born in a kitchen where love was the first ingredient. My grandmother believed in care before capitalism, in skin that held memory, in the power of women who never had to harden to prove their strength." Her eyes swept the crowd, then settled, purposefully, on Isaiah. "I used to think love was a risk I couldn't afford," she said softly. "But someone once painted me as I was, not as I pretended to be. And I realized, vulnerability isn't weakness, it's freedom." She turned slightly, reaching for Isaiah's hand again. "This is Isaiah Bell," she said, not as a side note, but as part of her truth. "Portrait artist, and the man I love." Gasps, smiles, a few raised brows, but neither of them flinched. Isaiah squeezed her hand gently, his voice low and even. I love you too. No script, no curated moment, just truth. The applause was thunderous, but neither of them heard it clearly. They stood together, cocooned in quiet certainty, while the rest of the world caught up. And in that light, not stage light, but real light, Zola Wade was seen. Completely. And she did not hide. The door to Zola's penthouse clicked open with a soft chime, followed by the muffled laughter of two people high on joy, connection, and something deeper, rightness. Zola slipped off her heels by the entryway and stepped inside, her curls now loosened from the regal braid, trailing softly down her back. Isaiah followed, jacket slung over one shoulder, his hand instinctively resting on the small of her back. The evening had been perfect, but something about returning here, together, felt significant. As Zola moved through the living room, she noticed the light had been left on in her private sitting area. Then she saw it, a canvas, positioned in front of the window facing the center of the room, as if waiting. She stopped cold. I didn't put that there, she said quietly. Isaiah said nothing, but his eyes never left her. Zola stepped forward cautiously, breath slowing as she took in the image. It was them, together. Her head nestled gently into Isaiah's shoulder, his arms wrapped around her waist. She was laughing, not just with her mouth, but with her whole body. Eyes closed, heart wide open, and on her left hand, a ring. A golden band with a single radiant stone. Zola turned slowly, heart caught between her ribs. Isaiah, is this? But he was no longer behind her. He was on one knee. A ring box open in his palm, eyes full of everything he'd painted, patience, reverence, and love. I finished the portrait, he said softly, but I realized I was still missing one thing. Zola blinked, completely still. My whole life, Isaiah continued, I've looked for someone who didn't just see me, but stayed. You let me see you. You let me love you. And now I want to build something with you that no one else gets to frame or approve. He looked up at her steady. Zola Wade, will you marry me? Tears welled in her eyes, not from fear this time, but from clarity. She looked at the painting again, at the woman she had once been afraid to be, and then back at the man who saw her long before she could. She smiled, wide, sure. Yes, she whispered, then louder, stronger. Yes. He rose slowly, slipping the ring onto her finger, the real version of what he'd envisioned in paint. And when he kissed her, it wasn't a beginning or an ending. It was a moment already promised, a life already in motion, a truth painted into forever. The end. Thank you for listening to Green Tea Tales. Help our channel with likes, shares, and subscribe.